Imagine a doctor having his medical license revoked, not for, malpractice, but because he gave away too much free medicine to the poor.
Right, which sounds completely counterintuitive today. You'd think an institution built on faith would, celebrate boundless compassion.
Exactly. Now, imagine that exact scenario happening in the 18th century Kingdom of Naples, where a priest was officially exiled by the king. And not for heresy, but for being entirely too forgiving.
It really is wild, but when unconditional forgiveness gets introduced into a system built on conditional compliance, the system often attacks it, like a virus.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are exploring the life of Saint Pompilio Maria Pirotti. And for you listening, we're leaning into a really fascinating stack of sources today. We've got historical biographies, Wikipedia entries, actual architectural restoration logs of a sanctuary.
Which are super interesting on their own, by the way.
Oh, totally. Plus transcripts from religious documentaries and articles on Catholic saints.
It's a lot of material to synthesize.
It is. Our mission today is to uncover how a deeply compassionate man navigated an incredibly rigid era. We want to piece together his youth, his miracles, his unique epithets, and the frankly chaotic process of his canonization.
Yeah, that canonization paperwork is a journey.
Okay, let's unpack this. We're stepping back into the 18th century, starting right in the messy reality of historical record-keeping. Because even the very first fact of his life, his name, is just this tangled web.
It really is. I mean, he was born in 1710 in the town of Montecalvo Irpino in Italy. But if you look at the parish registers, his birth name just, it fractures.
Fractures how?
Well, some documents list him as Domenico Michele Giovanni Battista, but others expand it to Domenico Michele Giovanni Francesco Nicola.
Which feels like half a dozen names just thrown into a hat.
Right. But when you look at the mechanics of 18th century baptismal records, it actually makes sense. Families were trying to honor multiple godparents, grandparents, and, local saints all at once.
To secure spiritual and social favor for the child.
Exactly. And it wasn't just his name that got scrambled in the archives. His parentage is also totally split, depending on the source.
Wait, really? They didn't even know who his parents were.
Well, some records say his parents were Pietro and Maria Pirotti. But the more dominant historical thread names them as Girolamo and Orsola Buzzuti. And that thread notes Domenico was the 6th of 11 children.
The divergence there tells us so much about how history was recorded and, frankly, lost in this region. We aren't dealing with digitized hospital records here.
Not at all. We are dealing with handwritten, dialect-heavy parish logs that were often translated into official Latin decades later.
Throw in the fact that the Irpinia region of Italy was repeatedly devastated by massive earthquakes.
Oh yeah, literally burying local archives under tons of rubble.
Right, so it's a miracle we have any cohesive timeline at all. But despite the clerical confusion over his exact birth certificate, every source converges on the defining conflict of his youth, the family rebellion.
What's fascinating here is how early this conviction started. By the time Domenico was 16, he felt this powerful pull toward the priesthood.
But his father, specifically identified in those dominant records as a doctor of law, was dead set against it.
Right, because in an 18th century honor society, a father with that kind of prominent legal and social standing would have very specific, likely very lucrative, plans for his son.
Joining a monastic order meant throwing away that social capital. So Domenico doesn't just argue with his dad, he flees.
He just takes off.
At 16 years old, he runs away from home and heads to Benevento to pursue his religious path, which is a staggering risk.
Oh, absolutely.
For you listening, it's like a modern teenager running away to join the Peace Corps because their parents wanted them to be a corporate lawyer. Was this level of teenage rebellion common for future saints?
I mean, defying a patriarch of that status wasn't just a teenage phase. It was a massive social transgression. To take your Peace Corps analogy a step further, imagine knowing that the organization you're fleeing to requires absolute obedience.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Meaning you can't just change your mind and come home if it gets hard.
Exactly. It highlights this deeply unshakable conviction. He wasn't casually interested in theology. He was willing to endure complete alienation from his family.
But the estrangement didn't last forever, thankfully. The tension finally broke when his father wrote him a profoundly moving letter.
A letter asking for forgiveness, right?
Yes. He actually asked for his teenage son's forgiveness for standing in the way of his calling, and he granted his full blessing.
That reconciliation clearly became a foundational emotional anchor for him, because shortly after that, at 18 years old, he traveled to Naples to enter the novitiate.
And for anyone unfamiliar with the term, the novitiate is essentially the intense training and testing period before a person officially takes their religious vows.
Right, it's where you leave your old life behind. And part of leaving that old life behind involves taking a new name.
So long, Domenica.
Exactly. He dropped his birth name entirely and chose Pompilio Maria to honor his deceased brother. He eventually became known as Pompilio Maria of St. Nicholas.
Taking a dead brother's name is such a heavy psychological choice. He's effectively carrying his family's trauma and memory forward, integrating their grief into his new spiritual identity.
It really shows that despite the earlier rebellion, his heart remained deeply tied to his family. And that deep capacity for empathy led him to choose a very specific path within the church.
Right, he didn't join a contemplative order to just, sit in a cloistered monastery.
No, he joined the Piarists, the Order of Poor Clerks Regular of the Mother of God of the Pious Schools.
Founded back in 1617 by Joseph Calasanz.
And the Piarists were radical for their time. Most religious orders took the standard 3 vows: poverty, chastity, and obedience.
Right.
But the Piarists took a 4th vow. They dedicated themselves exclusively to the Christian education of youth, particularly poor children, and they provided that education entirely for free.
Which was revolutionary in an era where literacy was treated as a luxury good, reserved strictly for the nobility and the wealthy merchant class.
Absolutely. So he was ordained to the priesthood. Our timelines point to around 1732 or 1734, and immediately became a teacher of literature.
He traveled extensively throughout central and southern Italy, Torri, Bari, Lecce, Brindisi, Ortona. He spent his days in the trenches of these impoverished communities.
And this is where he earned the epithet, the Apostle of the Abruzzi.
The Abruzzi being a rugged mountainous region of central Italy.
Right. And he earned that title not by preaching fire and brimstone from a pulpit, but through his tireless, on-the-ground work with disadvantaged kids. His educational philosophy was fundamentally holistic.
Emphasizing a balance between knowledge and virtue. I found his teaching methods really striking.
Oh, they were way ahead of their time.
Yeah. He seems like the 18th century equivalent of a modern progressive educator who just throws out the strict, standardized testing playbook. He didn't just want to cram Latin grammar into a starving child's head. He led with gentle compassion.
Which was not the norm. In 1730s, the educational system and the church at large relied heavily on punitive discipline and rigid memorization.
How would the establishment have received that kind of empathy?
With a lot of suspicion. The establishment viewed uneducated masses as a liability, sure, but they also feared overly independent thinkers. By treating poor children with profound empathy, Pompilio was subtly challenging the rigid hierarchy of the day.
Building up the self-worth of the lowest class. And his devotion wasn't strictly professional either. It was deeply personal.
Yes, he had an intense spiritual devotion to the Virgin Mary,
Whom he affectionately called Mama Bella, meaning beautiful mother.
Oh.
Which brings us to an incredible physical discovery detailed in the historical logs, the events in Montecalvo Irpino.
Oh, this story's amazing.
When Pompilio was still a child, long before he ran away, he reportedly made a prophecy to his mother about a specific wooden statue of Mary, Our Lady of the Abundance.
He told her it would one day be the center of immense public veneration, right?
Exactly. Now keep in mind, his family's home, the Pirotti Palace, was practically destroyed by a massive earthquake in 1702. Then, whatever was left was devastated again in a 1930 earthquake.
That 1931 caused the entire first floor to collapse into the basement. The building was essentially a tomb of rubble for centuries.
Until March 16, 2001. A team exploring the walled-up, ruined basement of that old family palace broke through a section of the wall.
And inside, miraculously preserved despite centuries of structural collapse and moisture, they found a group of wooden statues.
Including that exact nursing Madonna. Today, it is publicly venerated, fulfilling the prophecy he made almost 300 years prior.
The survival of that statue in the dark is such a fascinating parallel to how his own reputation survived the dark periods of his professional life.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because while he was beloved by his students and the common people, his gentle methods eventually triggered a massive institutional backlash.
Right, his empathy didn't stop in the classroom. It extended directly into the confessional box.
The biographies note that Pompilio's confessional was constantly crowded. People lined up for hours just to speak with him.
And this enraged his detractors. He was formally accused by other clerics of being too easy and indulgent with sinners.
Wait, he was fired for being too nice. That's like a doctor getting his medical license revoked because he gave away too much free medicine to the poor. How did the church justify punishing someone for acting exactly like the founder of their faith?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to unpack the mechanics of the 18th century confessional.
Okay, lay it out for us.
In the Kingdom of Naples at that time, fear of damnation was a primary mechanism for social control. The church and the state were deeply intertwined. Obedience to God often translated directly to obedience to the ruling class.
So when a priest tells the poorest, most desperate citizens that their sins are unconditionally forgiven,
And he does so with boundless mercy rather than demanding harsh penance. He is disrupting that power dynamic.
he's taking away the institution's leverage. And the institution struck back hard. Cardinal Archbishop Antonio Cercel of Naples officially suspended Pompilio from hearing confessions altogether.
The justification was likely framed around preventing moral laxity, maintaining strict theological standards. But the real issue was authority. Radical mercy is deeply threatening to an institution that relies on the strict enforcement of rules.
And it didn't stop with the archbishop. The punishment jumped from the church directly to the monarchy.
This is the crazy part.
Right. King Charles III actually signed an official decree expelling Pompilio from the entire Kingdom of Naples. He was literally exiled by the state for being too forgiving.
It perfectly illustrates the threat that mercy poses to power. But the state fundamentally underestimated the loyalty of the common people.
The public outcry was massive. The people he had educated and consoled just refused to let him be quietly discarded.
The pressure grew so intense that King Charles was eventually forced to rescind the decree of exile.
Pompilio was allowed to return. And what I find most remarkable is how he reacted. He didn't return with a vengeance. He didn't curse the cardinal or hold a grudge against the king,
He just quietly went right back to the confessional and back to the poor.
which solidified his reputation as a living saint. And during this later period of his life, the historical records begin documenting extraordinary, miraculous events.
Like the living miracle.
Yes. During a severe famine in the region of Apulia, witnesses claimed he managed to feed 300 starving people from a single pot of broth.
It's a direct parallel to the biblical feeding of the multitudes just happening right there in southern Italy.
But his relentless pace eventually caught up with his physical body. On July 15, 1766, in the town of Campi Salentina, he fell ill immediately after doing what he loved most, hearing confessions.
He died in his bed shortly after at the age of 55.
And his physical remains became a huge focal point of veneration for the town. The church where he was buried was officially elevated to the sanctuary of Saint Pompilio Maria Pirotti in 1939 by Bishop Alberto Costa.
And to mark the bicentennial of his death in 1966, his remains were placed in a new artistic urn.
Though there is also a bone relic displayed in a silver frame in a church dedicated to him back in his hometown of Montecalvo Rapino.
Right. And the physical architecture of that sanctuary in Campi Salentina actually gives us a brilliant lens through which to view his legacy today.
You're talking about the recent restoration.
Yeah, the sanctuary recently underwent a major conservative restoration funded by an Italian state program called the Bonus Faciate.
The restoration logs are so detailed, they repaired severe lightning damage to the bell tower, and they restored the intricate Lecce stone friezes.
Lecce stone is this highly porous, malleable limestone native to southern Italy. It allows for incredibly detailed carvings, but it makes the stone very susceptible to weathering.
Right, and to combat that weathering over the decades, previous builders had just slapped modern concrete and marble wainscoting all over the main facade.
Which is a terrible idea.
The recent architects literally ripped all of that modern concrete off because the concrete was suffocating the building.
Adding rigid concrete to 17th century masonry is essentially like putting a plastic bag over a living plant.
Oh, that's a great way to describe it.
Yeah, materials like Lecce stone and the original coccio plaster, which is this ancient, highly breathable building material made from crushed bricks and lime, they were designed to naturally absorb and release moisture.
So the modern concrete trapped all that water inside.
Exactly, literally rotting the historical foundation from within. By removing the rigid modern additions, the authentic core of the building was finally allowed to breathe.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? To me, it's the perfect physical manifestation of his life.
How so?
Well, the rigid bureaucracy of the 18th century tried to put a plastic bag over Pompilio's grassroots, breathable methods of compassion. They tried to suffocate him with decrees and concrete rules.
But the foundation of his empathy outlasted the system that tried to cover it up. That is a highly functional way to look at it.
And ironically, even after his death, That same rigid bureaucracy tried to complicate his legacy one last time during his official canonization process.
Right, because becoming a saint in the Catholic Church is one of the most heavily documented bureaucratic processes on earth.
You generally need verified posthumous miracles attributed to your intercession. For Pompilio, the Congregation for the Causes of Saints validated two major ones.
The first happened in 1867 when a woman named Maria Mossi was completely cured of acute pulmonary tuberculosis after praying to him.
And the second miracle is particularly fascinating because of its context. In 1941, an Italian soldier named Delfino Baroni contracted severe, life-threatening malaria during World War II.
He invoked Pompilio and experienced a rapid, total recovery that defied all medical expectations.
I actually dug into this. How do they validate a miracle in 1941? Validating something in 1867 is one thing, but by WWII, medicine was advancing rapidly.
Oh, for sure.
We had better diagnostics, a deep understanding of infectious diseases. It seems counterintuitive that the Church could declare a miracle when modern science is standing right there in the room.
Actually, the presence of modern science makes the validation process much more rigorous, not less. Yeah. The Church employs independent medical boards, which heavily feature secular doctors and specialists. They review the clinical charts, the lab results, and the exact timeline of the illness.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize they brought in secular doctors.
They have to. For the Church to officially declare the 1941 malaria cure a miracle, that medical board had to look at all the contemporary World War II-era science and unanimously conclude that there was absolutely no medical, pharmacological, or physiological explanation for Baroni's sudden recovery.
So the advancement of science provided the rigorous baseline necessary to prove the event was medically impossible.
Exactly.
So the miracles were locked in and validated. But if you look at our sources for the actual date he was officially handed the title of saint, the paperwork chaos returns.
Oh, the historical dates are a mess.
Some historical chronology state he was made venerable in 1878, beatified in 1890 by Pope Leo XIII, and then officially canonized on March 19, 1934 by Pope Pius XI.
Yet, another set of documents explicitly claims he was canonized in 1988 or 1990 by Pope John Paul II.
And another throws out 1964 by Pope Paul VI. It's like having a resume where 3 different CEOs at the same company are taking credit for promoting you.
Right.
How does the historical record get this sloppy?
This raises an important question about how historical and religious record-keeping works in the digital age. It basically comes down to how databases aggregate Vatican history.
Okay.
The process of sainthood has multiple stages: venerable, blessed, and saint. Sometimes the date of beatification gets mislabeled as canonization.
That makes sense.
Furthermore, later popes often reaffirm a saint's patronage or elevate their local feast days. For example, Pope Paul VI or Pope John Paul II may have issued a decree expanding Pompilio's veneration.
And a localized digital archive mistakenly logged that reaffirmation as his primary canonization year.
Exactly. The most meticulously sourced chronologies point to the 1934 canonization by Pius XI as the original elevation. But while the exact dates and popes are convoluted across different documents, the unanimous agreement across all sources is the validation of his 2 major miracles.
The clerical timestamps might get messy across translated articles, but the ultimate outcome remains unanimous. His sainthood was cemented, and today he is officially recognized as the patron saint of catechists of religious teachers.
Which is incredibly fitting. The man who dedicated his life to educating the most marginalized youth, who balanced intellectual rigor with profound virtue, remains the standard-bearer for teachers.
We've navigated the murky waters of his fragmented birth records, his teenage rebellion, his progressive teaching, his state exile, and the heavy bureaucracy of his sainthood. And looking at all of this, it's easy to view an 18th century priest as a distant, unrelatable figure.
But the mechanics of his struggle are entirely modern. The central tension of his life was the friction between radical compassion and institutional order.
For you listening, why does an 18th century Italian priest matter today? Because Pompilio's life is a masterclass in staying true to your core values, specifically empathy and compassion, even when the established authority actively punishes you for it.
We often assume that institutions inherently crave goodness. But history consistently shows us that institutions primarily crave order.
Pompilio shows us what happens when unconditional forgiveness is introduced into an environment built on conditional compliance. It causes a system shock.
He was suspended, he was exiled by a king, his reputation was attacked by his own colleagues, And he never blinked.
He just kept caring for the people the system had forgotten. He refused to compromise his gentle nature.
Which leaves us with a final, lingering question to explore on our own. If Pompilio was expelled for being too merciful and forgiving in an era of strict rules, how many modern institutions, workplaces, schools, or even justice systems are currently exiling their own Pompilios today?
Just because their radical compassion threatens the rigid status quo.
Exactly.
It's a heavy thought. We like to think we'd celebrate that kind of boundless empathy, but often we just try to cover it up with concrete. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the sources, exploring the rebellious, brilliantly merciful life of Saint Pompilio Maria Pirotti. Have a great rest of your day.